When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing Bran for A Clash of Kings. And I will say, I think Bran gets a lot of criticism for his chapters, especially I'd say within the first 3 books. I do think of all the POVs, he's probably my least favorite through the first 3 books. But I will say this is a really good chapter in my opinion. It's not a super long chapter. It's a really nice medium-sized chapter that gets to the point. Everything's been kind of building with Bran becoming this kind of magical character within A Song of Ice and Fire. And it's going to take a long time for Bran to really develop his powers at all, which is why I really like him in book 5. But here is where it all starts to get going. We start to see why the Reeds actually came to Winterfell. We start to unlock some of those powers for Bran and start to get him kind of reflecting on everything that's happened within the first 2 books. So again, I really do enjoy this chapter for Bran, but let's not waste any time and let's get into page 325. Mira moved cautiously in a circle with her net loose in her left hand and a frog spear ready in her right. Summer watched her intently, following her movements. This is just like a training session is the way I would describe it. Mira is trying to catch Summer and Summer is trying to like playfully attack. Mira shouted and thrust her spear, but Summer dodged and leapt before she could pull it back. Mira cast her net, which unfolded in midair. Now, it seemed like Summer had won this because Summer leaps into the air and basically is on Mira's chest, but in reality, Summer's leap actually carries him into the net, unable to like bite at Mira or anything of that nature. He's trying to get out of it. Mira's spear flew away, and the fall knocked the breath from her. Summer crouched on top of her, and Bran didn't really realize what he was seeing. He thought that Summer had won and Mira had lost, but Jojen corrected him, saying she had won because Summer was snared, which was correct. Bran noticed that Summer was entangled, and worsening it by struggling. Mira laughed and embraced the tangled wolf, rolling with him, and Summer whimpered as he kicked at the cords. Mira knelt and skillfully untangled the net, freeing Summer. It's a nice little opening just to kind of show how good Mira is. You know, you think about women in this world, we don't see many that are good in terms of fighting, and you think about how many people would ever actually be able to stand up against a direwolf, and Mira kind of outsmarts Summer. And so that's a really interesting way of developing the character because in the last chapter, yes, Mira and Jojen are introduced, but we don't really get a lot. And so really having this nice establishing moment for Mira, kind of showing her as someone similar to Arya and who Bran will compare her to, I think it's a really nice open for her character. Bran called Summer to him and opened his arms. Summer rushed into him, dragging Bran through the grass. Bran and Summer wrestled and rolled together, with Bran laughing and Summer yapping. You really see the connection that the two have. It's something where we look at the Starks, and all of them have varying levels of connection with their direwolves. Bran seems to be the strongest, followed by either Arya or Jon. At this point of the story, I would probably say Jon, but as the story goes on, I'd probably say more Arya. But, you know, you see that with varying degrees with the Stark children. Bran ended up on top of the Muddy Wolf, praising him as Summer licked Bran's ear, and that gets us into page 326. Mira asked if Summer ever grew angry, and Bran said Summer never did with him and demonstrated playful roughhousing with the wolf. It's kind of suggesting, and this is what Mira is trying to ask, is does Summer seem to follow your commands? Does Summer seem to follow your emotions and trying to like get to the root of all of this, right? Because we know this chapter is about Mira and Jojen trying to convince Bran of his magical potential and the three-eyed crow and all these things that have been building up to now. And so they're kind of trying to gauge where Bran is in his connection with his wolf. Mira expressed concern that Summer might have hurt her if he had gotten past the net, which I think anybody would be worried about. This is a wolf. This is not a pet. Well, for anyone else than Starks, this is not a pet. But yet, Bran assures her that Summer would never have hurt her because he knew Bran liked her. Now, we know Bran has a crush on Mira, but it's also like, okay, to other people around Bran that are friendly with Bran. So, for instance, Summer would never attack Hodor, for instance. And that's really important because that's not normal for an animal, right? You and your animal are never that connected to where the animal usually knows who you like and who you don't like. It's never like that, right? Usually it takes, commands. You think like German shepherds for the police or of that nature. Like, there are dogs that are very intelligent, of course, but this is like a different level of that, right? There is a connection here. Bran continues, noting that most lords and knights had left after the harvest feast, but the Reeds had stayed and become Bran's constant companions, which is also another thing that's a bit odd, right? Everybody else has left since the feast, but here is Jojen and Mira staying. It tells you that they have some interest in what's happening at Winterfell, especially with Bran. This isn't something like, oh, they're being sent to wards at Winterfell. It's a bit different. Bran even thinks how Jojen was solemn and called little grandfather by old Nan, and Mira reminded Bran of Arya due to her toughness and skill. I think those are really great comparisons, and there's a lot of foreshadowing in this chapter to, I believe, what the fate of Jojen is, to be used as a tool to awaken Bran's powers, to be killed or sacrificed in a dance with dragons, and or Winds of Winter. We probably won't find out what actually happened until Winds, if we ever find that out. I think there's a lot of foreshadowing in here, and so when I get to that, I will point that out. But there's a reason that Jojen kind of is the way he is. He knows his, I believe that he knows his fate anyway, and that he is somebody that's seeing all of these visions, and that's going to really age you up and kind of make you somebody that isn't like a kid, that's much more mature. Mira was nearly 16 and older than Bran, but she and Jojen never treated him like a child. Because in a lot of ways, I think that Mira and Jojen understand that Bran doesn't want to be treated like a cripple or like a kid. I think a lot of people don't like being treated like that. Even when you're younger, you always want to be an adult. You always just want to be treated with respect, and that's just something I think that they understand. Mira and Jojen are very intelligent. Bran said he wished the Reeds were his wards instead of the Walders, and who wouldn't? It's either the Walders or Mira and Jojen. They seem like much better company. Bran began struggling toward a tree, and he refused Mira's help. It kind of goes back to what I just said. Bran doesn't want to be seen as this weak kid who has to be helped by everybody and can't do anything on his own. And I think also there's a little bit here where Bran is trying to show off that, he has strength. He is somebody that has a strong will to, do things in front of Mira because, well, he has a crush on Mira, and that'll develop as the story goes on. He used his arms to push himself backward until he sat with his back against a tall ash tree. Summer lay down with his head in Bran's lap, and Bran asked Mira if her master at arms taught her to fight with a net. Who taught her how to do this, right? This isn't something that you see all that much in Westeros in terms of women being trained to fight, and Mira says that it was her father who had taught her in Howland Reed. And she continues that Greywater had no knights, no master at arms, or maester. And Brand asked who kept their ravens. Now, this is a really big point. If they don't have like a maester, if they don't have a master of arms, no knights, all this stuff, you kind of wonder about their society, right? They are really, really, I would say, traditionalists in terms of the old gods and the old powers, not even having a maester. And so it kind of makes you understand why there's not a lot of communication with the Reeds. If you can't find their castle with the Raven, think about how long it's going to take for somebody on foot to go from Winterfell all the way to Greywater Watch. That's going to take forever. So you think about going there and then coming back. It's just very ineffective. And so that's why you really don't see the Reeds all that much. Bran asked who kept the ravens, but Mira said ravens couldn't find Greywater Watch, nor could enemies. When Bran asked why, Mira said it was because Greywater Watch moved. Bran had never heard of a moving castle and couldn't tell if she was teasing. That's how I would feel if I'm Bran. How does this castle just move? And even I think in the community, we still have questions on how that actually works. How is that foundationally sound? Like, if you're moving, how is the ground good enough to build homes on and things like that? So, yeah, I mean, a castle that, is very difficult to find is definitely going to be a really big asset to the defense of the North. And let's take a step further. Ravens can't reach their castle. Think about you trying to invade their land. It's what makes the North very difficult to invade, because not only do you have to go through Moat Cailin and the land of, the Neck where the Reeds are, you also have to go through, terrible conditions and the vastness of the North. That's why I always say, if it wasn't for dragons, the North could never be conquered. You just can't. There's no way to do it. And so I think this really adds to that idea. He said he wished he could see it and asked if her father might let him visit after the war. It's so interesting because Bran is somebody that, again, doesn't really act like someone like Joffrey, for instance. Right now, Bran's a prince. Bran can go wherever he wants to, whenever, I would say more when the war's over. He gets older. He can go where he wants to go. But he asks it like oh, can I come spend the night at your house type thing? And I just find that very wholesome from Bran. Mira replied he would be welcome now or then. But this is an interesting statement, right? that Bran maybe could leave Winterfell and go there today, or, go there within the next coming weeks. That's something that Bran would love. He's been cooped up in Winterfell, not able to do anything for a good amount of time now. He wants to explore. And Bran, who had always lived at Winterfell, said he could ask Sir Roderick when he returned. And so we don't get a lot here of the northern politics, which has kind of been my favorite parts of Bran's past chapters. We get a little tidbit here, but it's something that's like very brief. And it's one of the things that I think George does really well is that he subtly foreshadows all the northern politics that's going on. And so if you're not paying attention, you just might not understand what's actually going on. And a question I want to give to you guys as we figure out what Ramsay's kind of been up to. What do you guys think of the characterization of Ramsay in the book versus the show? In the show, I think they made Ramsay much more intelligent. I think that in the book, he's somebody that, yes, is very brutal and cruel, and he's a good villain, but he's not necessarily the smartest. Like, you think about what he's going to do. And so let's introduce what he does and then we'll talk about it. But getting into page 327, Sir Roderick was away in the east trying to fix trouble caused by Roose Bolton's bastard, Ramsay. The bastard had seized Lady Hornwood after the harvest feast on her way back and married her that night, despite being young enough to be her son. Lord Manderley then took her castle, claiming to protect it from the Boltons. Sir Roderick was angry at both the bastard and Lord Manderley equally. So let's think about this for a second. If you're Ramsay, everything right now is going well for the Starks, right? Stannis and Renly are against the Lannisters at this point. Robb is kind of winning for right now anyway. And so the Lannisters are in a bad position. Why would you, if you're Ramsay, at this point where the Starks still control the North, right? The Greyjoys haven't attacked yet. Robb's campaign is doing great. Why would you go and kidnap Lady Hornwood and do what he does to her? I think it's a bad plan, and I think it goes to Ramsay being more impulsive, not a great politician, and who he is more in the books. But I did want to kind of pose that question, like, what do you think about the characterization versus the book and the show of Ramsay? But it also reinforces what Lady Hornwood was saying, that Ramsay was going to try and take her castle, right? And that was a huge concern that people kind of seemed to brush off. They kind of said, oh, Ramsay would never do that, right? Because then everybody would come attack him and all that stuff. But it's a lot of things where if you are, Bran, if he was older, and you're Roderick, the person that's really in charge of Winterfell right now, and really the North in a lot of ways, you're looking at this and you're going, okay, they're seeing weakness, right? Ramsay's doing this right in front of our noses. Wyman Manderley is taking the castle and the lands. This is all stuff that is going directly against Roderick's orders. And so I think that's a little bit of what's going on here. It's almost like a testing phase for where the North is truly at. Bran continues, though, saying that Sir Roderick might let him leave Winterfell, but Maester Luwin would never allow it. Because you're in a war scenario right now. You don't know, what spies or scouts could maybe be trying to kidnap Bran to use as a hostage for the Lannisters or whatnot. Also, you've got somebody like Ramsay Bolton right now who is causing, mayhem and all that stuff. So I think Maester Luwin is wise to not let him go until the war is over, but Bran is not going to see that. He's a kid. He's not going to understand those things. Jojen, sitting under the weirwood, told Bran it would be good for him to leave Winterfell soon. We know the motivation here, right? Jojen and Meera are trying to get Bran to awaken himself because he had this vision that Bran is kind of being held down, right? That he is not being allowed to reach his full potential. And one of those people that's kind of holding him back is Maester Luwin and the things that Maester Luwin tells Bran. Meera explained that Jojen had the green sight and dreamed of things that hadn't happened yet, but sometimes came true. Jojen insisted it wasn't sometimes. His green dreams were always true. This is a very interesting point, because if you're sitting here, why would Meera say sometimes? If Jojen knows that they've all come true so far, why does Meera say sometimes? I really believe this is because Jojen sees what's going to happen with his fate, and Meera knows that. We get hints to that all throughout the books. I think this is that first nod to it. That Meera is trying to say, hey, we can stop this, right? Jojen, you won't have to die, in the way that you're going to. We can stop that. And Jojen is like, no, I'm accepting it. That's what's going to happen. That is my destiny. That's what I think the argument is going in right now. And we're going to see this play out in a couple paragraphs where we see like Jojen talking about, his fate. Bran asked what was going to happen, and Jojen said he would tell Bran if Bran told him about his dreams. This seemed to quiet the godswood. Bran was uncomfortable to talk about what he had seen for a number of reasons. Because as Bran is going to recall, he recalls, this golden man that he saw in this dream in the last chapter, and the three-eyed crow, and how he was visited by him back in book 1 and things like that, and the memory of crunching bones and blood. He claimed he didn't have dreams because Maester Luwin gave him sleeping draughts. We know that to not be the case. Bran, worked into summer when the Reeds came to see the wolves, so we know that's just not true. But I do think something that's interesting is, we have this conversation. Does Bran know exactly what happened to him back in book 1 when he was pushed from the window? I think Bran has an idea that that is what happened, but it's something that he's unsure of. He doesn't know exactly, and he hasn't really come to this conclusion until book 2. So when I make, videos where I make statements like what if Bran had actually remembered earlier on in the story, that could have played a big role. Bran could have been used as evidence against the Lannisters. He doesn't really figure that out until it's too late, right? Because now the country's already at war. Bran knowing who pushed him out of a tower doesn't really matter at this point. But Mira counters this, saying everyone in Winterfell knew Bran woke up shouting and sweating. Again, it's really weird when you take a step back if you're Bran and you think about, wait, the Reeds seem to be asking about me. They seem to understand already who I am without me telling them things. They have an interest in me that's a little interesting, right? They show up the harvest feast, they linger here, they're, trying to figure out information about me, kind of picking up on rumors. It's really interesting. Jojen urged him to share what frightened him, but Bran resisted, saying dreams might mean anything or nothing. And that's what we usually think, right? Today, dreams sometimes can reflect your fears, your insecurities, or things you think might happen, or it could be just nothing. Sometimes you just have random, mysterious dreams that don't mean anything. So Bran, is being told this by Luwin, and that's kind of an understanding of dreams even today. Mira said green dreams were different from normal dreams. Jojen, with his moss-colored eyes, described a dream of a winged wolf bound to earth by gray stone chains. And this signifies, of course, Bran. Now, there's a number of things that you can say on the actual chains. You think about the way the maesters are described as kind of like these gray rats and stuff like that, especially by somebody like Barbary Dustin. It's, I think, a lot of things. One, I think that it's Winterfell holding Bran back and the people he knows at Winterfell from leaving and going north to the wall and to get his third eye. But it's also, I think, the maesters and some of what Luwin has kind of pushed back on these ideas that go against what Jojen and Mira are saying. But Jojen continues saying, a three-eyed crow tried to peck through the chains, but couldn't break them. Bran asked if the crow had 3 eyes, and Jojen nodded. This is interesting because Bran has never seen or heard anyone else talk about this three-eyed crow, but now he has somebody that shares in the dream that Bran had. Summer raised his head and looked at Jojen, as this has piqued his curiosity. Jojen shared that the crow came to him when he nearly died from gray water fever. Bran said the crow came to him after he fell and told him he had to fly or die. So again, the three-eyed crow seems to come to people when they are at their weakest. Maybe they're most susceptible to death, and the three-eyed crow saves them and puts them on a path to become like a student of his. That maybe could line up with what Euron was experiencing as well. But Bran continues saying that when he woke up from the dream, he was broken and he couldn't fly. Again, it goes back to how Bran thinks that the three-eyed crow lied. It said that he could fly, but he couldn't. He can't trust these dreams because he's still Bran. He can't walk. As we get into page 328, Mira told Bran he could fly if he wanted to and began untangling and folding her net. Bran obviously doesn't know what this means, but Jojen continues. Jojen told Bran he was the winged wolf and that the crow had sent them to break his chains. Jojen believes that his sole purpose is to get Bran to the three-eyed crow and fulfill his destiny. Bran asked if the crow was at Greywater, but Jojen said no, the crow was in the north. Bran asked if the crow was at the wall. He always wanted to go to the wall, but Mira said it was even further, where the real old gods are, north of the wall. And this is something that's going to be really surprising here if you're Bran. How is Bran ever going to go north of the wall? No one's ever going to allow that to occur. And so that's something, if you're Jojen and Mira, you got to be considering, how would you even get north of the wall? That seems impossible at the moment. Bran asked how to break the chains, and Jojen told him to open his third eye. Bran said both of his eyes were open. And Bran doesn't really know what this means. How do you open your third eye? There's no tutorial. You can't go on YouTube and say, how do I open my third eye? All of this seems foreign. It seems completely against everything Bran has ever been taught. And so you can understand why Bran seems to push back on the Reeds, because in a lot of ways, I think Bran seems to think that they're playing some sort of game with him, trying to make him look a fool. We started with talking about floating and moving castles, and now we're talking about this three-eyed crow, character. Jojen said he had three eyes, and the crow had given him the third, but he refused to open it. Jojen explained with two eyes, Bran could see faces and trees, but with three, he could see deeper truths and farther distances. It's something that they're trying to tell Bran he's special. And Bran feels kind of dumb. It feels like they're playing some sort of game with him, and that is instantly shown in the way his direwolf acts, right? Summer stood up instantly, and Bran, nervous, said he didn't need to see that far and changed the subject to wolves and lizard lions. Bran didn't want to be reminded of these dreams where he was, either in Summer's body or was seeing things from his past that scared him. And so Bran continues trying to change the subject as he asked if Mira had ever hunted a lizard lion, and she started to explain their swamp habitat. But Jojen interrupts this once again, and he tries to get back to the topic. Bran has already shown he's uncomfortable with the topic, and now Jojen has brought it back. Jojen interrupted, asking if Bran had dreamed of a lizard lion, and Bran said no and insisted he didn't want to talk about dreams. This is now the second time Bran has tried to push back, but Jojen continues going further. Jojen asked if Bran had dreamed of a wolf, and Bran at this finally gets angry, and he said he didn't have to tell about his dreams and asserted his authority as the Prince and the Stark in Winterfell. Again, Jojen and Mira are pushing, and I would say more Jojen than Mira, of course, but they're pushing Bran to talk about things he doesn't want to talk about. It kind of gives me the similar vibe of, if you have depression or you have anxiety or you have something that you've done in your past that you don't like to talk about, this is kind of what that is, right? It's like a therapist maybe trying to get you to talk about those things, or maybe your parents trying to force that out of you when you don't want to talk about it. That's the kind of the vibe I get here, and so Bran is getting more angry and more frustrated. Jojen asked if it was summer he dreamed of, but Bran told him to be quiet. Jojen said Bran had dreamed he was summer in the God's Wood on the night of the harvest feast. Bran shouted at him to stop, and Summer bared his teeth and moved toward the weirwood. Jojen calmly said that when he touched Summer, he felt Bran inside the wolf, just as he was now. This is all foreign to Bran, and for Bran, he might be scared of this. What does this mean? Is he some sort of, freak? What does that mean? Because in Bran's heart, he knows that Jojen has a point. He was in Summer and during the harvest feast, but he doesn't want to admit it. And that gets us into page 329. Bran insisted he had been in bed sleeping, denying Jojen's claim that he had been in the God's Wood. Jojen said he felt Bran there, dressed in gray, and felt him fall. And this is going to get at one of Bran's biggest insecurities. This time when he fell, when Bran's whole life changed. He could no longer be a knight, and he had to go down this route of being a cripple. Bran thought about the fall, the Golden Man, Jaime Lannister, the Golden Man who we know to be Jaime Lannister, and how much it scared him, especially the falling. He doesn't want to remember these things, right? Bran might subconsciously understand what was going on there, but he doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't want to think about how his whole life changed. He couldn't admit his fear or talk about it to anyone, not Sir Roderick, Maester Luwin, or the Reeds. Jojen gently asked if Bran fell every night in his dreams, and this seemed to be the last provocation to Bran, as Summer growled deeply, no longer playing. Mira stepped between Jojen and the wolf, spear ready, and asked Bran to keep Summer back. Bran said Jojen was making Summer angry, but Jojen wasn't making Summer angry. More, Jojen was making Bran angry and showing the two have a connection because their emotions are intertwined. Mira prepared her net again, and Jojen said it was Bran's own anger and fear reflected in the wolf, which he is correct. But Bran denied it and said he wasn't a wolf, though remembering howling and tasting blood in his dreams. Again, Bran thinks this can't be true. There's no magic. Maester Luwin has told him this his whole life. But at the same time, he's starting to doubt that. He's starting to question Jojen's words. Jojen said part of Bran was Summer and part of Summer was Bran. Summer lunged at this as Mira blocked him with her spear. The wolf circled and stalked again as Mira turned with him. Bran shouted and slapped his thigh to call Summer back, feeling a tingle in his hand but nothing in his leg. Summer didn't listen though. Again, Bran himself doesn't have full control over Summer. This is to show that, right? This is Summer's, I feel, still a bit of part of Bran's emotion, but also his more wild nature. Summer lunged again and Mira dodged and held her ground, but at this, another entered the little skirmish. Shaggy Dog, sensing Bran's rage, emerged from the bushes with bared teeth. Now we not only see that Bran has a connection with his wolf, he also has a connection with Shaggy Dog. And all of the direwolves we know seem to have some connection. They know when another one of the direwolves die, and things like their other family members, like Rob, for instance, dying or being in pain. So I think that's really interesting because that's also established here. Shaggy Dog senses that. Mira stood between the wolves and her brother, pleading with Bran to call them off, but Bran said he couldn't. He didn't know how. Mira told Jojen to climb the tree, and Jojen said, I want you guys to pay careful attention to this, he says it wasn't the day he would die. Even with two wolves that were no longer playing, especially Rickon's, and you think about Rickon's wolf, he doesn't think he's going to die. Why is he so cocksure of that if he hasn't seen his death already? Now, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's that Jojen knows he has more of a role to play than just this. But either way, Mira screamed at him to climb, and Jojen scrambled up the weirwood, using its face for handholds. The direwolves closed in, and Mira dropped her spear and net, leapt, and pulled herself into a tree branch. Shaggy Dog snapped at her ankle as she swung out of reach, and Summer sat and howled. Shaggy Dog grabbed the net and shook it violently in his teeth. As we get into page 330, Bran was still trying to figure out how to get control of the wolves when he realized they weren't alone and called for Hodor, feeling frightened and ashamed. He liked the Reeds. He liked enjoying, their company. And here, the wolves that attacked them could have killed them. He feels embarrassed for his actions, as I think a lot of people would. He assured Mira and Jojen the wolves wouldn't hurt Hodor. Hodor arrived half-dressed and muddy from the hot pools, and Bran asked Hodor to chase off the wolves. Now, what I think is really awesome and funny is the way I picture this in my head, as Hodor doesn't even seem to recognize these are direwolves basically that were attacking these kids. He gives one of these. He's just like, shoo away, Summer, shoo away, Shaggy Dog, just shoo away. I'm just like, I love Hodor. I mean, this is some of the stuff that he only can say one word, but George writes the character in such a way that you just enjoy the character. And I think the way they did Hodor in the show as well kind of adds to that. Hodor gleefully stamped and shouted, scaring off Shaggy Dog first. Then Summer returned to Bran and lay beside him. Mira climbed down and grabbed her spear and net, and Jojen still watched Summer, promising that they would talk again. Bran thought the wolves' behavior was strange and blamed them, not himself. Bran is still sitting here, not realizing what's going on. That Bran was the true cause of it, not the wolves themselves. They were acting on Bran's own emotion and even maybe commands. He wondered if Maester Luwin had been right to keep the direwolves locked up to begin with, but Bran asked Hodor to take him to Maester Luwin. So now that we've seen the Reed side of things, Bran has questions. Because there are things that cannot be coincidences. If Jojen is seeing the same things as Bran, or there's some connection there, Bran has to go back to what he's known his whole life, Maester Luwin. What is Maester Luwin's explanations for what's going on here? The Maester's turret below the rookery was one of Bran's favorite places, full of books, scrolls, and bottles, and Luwin was perched on a stool writing when Hodor entered with Bran. Luwin greeted Bran and noted he was early for his lessons, and Bran used a wall sconce to pull himself from the basket. Then Hodor carried him to a chair. Bran told Luwin that Mira and Jojen had the green sight, and Luwin reacted mildly and scratched his nose with his quill. For Luwin, this probably just means, oh, they might think they have that because of maybe a dream or two coming true. That isn't the case. Luwin has been told his whole life that magic is not a true thing, that all of the magic of the world was gone. he's going to just scoff at this, as most of the maesters do. Bran recalled being told of the children in the forest that had green sight, and Lewin confirmed their wise men were called Greenseers. When asked if it was magic, Lewin said it could be called that, but at heart it was just a different kind of knowledge. What a weird way of stating that. Is it magic? Well, it might be magic, but I mean, it's just a different kind of knowledge. Like, yes, that's true, I guess, but yeah, it's magic. Like, Lewin is one of those people that, you like Lewin, of course, but when it comes to magic, when it comes to things he doesn't understand, he's just like, I mean, but it's not here, is it, right now? So what does it matter? Like that's the way Lewin goes about things. And getting into page 331, Bran asked what the green site actually was. Maester Lewin said, "No one truly knows. The children of the forest are gone, and so is their wisdom." Again, but how are you so sure they're gone? Yes, they haven't been spotted south of the wall or any of those things in a long amount of time, but who is to say that their power is gone, right? Nobody really explores the deep north. How would we know if they're truly gone? And that's where I think the ignorance of the maesters comes from. And it's a lot of, okay, the maesters preach science, literature, things that we can feasibly look at, and then we just kind of discount anything else like magic because it kind of goes against what we preach and what we, stand for. It's a lot of reasons why I think that if you want to look at the Maester conspiracy theory, a lot of it is rooted in this idea, right? The idea that magic relating to the Targaryens and to the dragons is key to, their actual ideas and their ideals. Their actual ideas and the way that they go about themselves is rooted in opposing that. He explained that the first men believed Greenseers could see through the eyes of the weirwoods, and that's why they cut down the trees during the war with the children. But again, I will say with Lewin's defense, this is stuff that happened thousands of years ago. So it's really hard to suggest, oh, was that the case? Or did they cut down these trees because these trees scared them or made them uneasy? Could people actually see through them? You don't really know, but I think it's that Lewin shuts it down that that's not even really a possibility because we don't, know is what I think is the wrong side of that. But yeah. He also says the Greenseers supposedly had power over animals, beasts, birds, and even fish. Lewin asked if Jojen claimed such powers, but Bran said no. But Mira said Jojen has dreams that sometimes come true. Lewin noted that everyone has dreams that sometimes come true, reminding Bran of the dream he and Rickon had about their father. But it's weird that Lewin brings this up. Why would Bran and Rickon have the exact same dream that ended up being true? That cannot be a coincidence. I'm sorry. Have you ever dreamed the exact same dream as somebody else? Like, think about that. You had such a crazy dream that, like, oh, it said maybe someone in your family was going to get sick or something like that, and somebody else in your family had the exact same dream. That is not a coincidence. I think Lewin is using that to try and back his own argument, but in a lot of ways, it kind of just reminds Bran have this crazy event that kind of reinforces what Jojen and Mira were telling him. He cautioned Bran not to forget the countless dreams that never came true, which is a good point, right? There's been a lot of dreams that Bran has had that probably have never come to pass. Then he asked Bran if he remembered the meaning of a maester's chain's collar, and Bran recalled it was forged at the Citadel in Old Town, each metal representing a different discipline, and the chain itself symbolizing service. Lewin rotated his chain to show a link of Valyrian steel worn by only one maester in 100, signifying the study of the higher mysteries, aka magic. But here's the biggest issue here. In terms of magic, if you're looking at the magic that we know is a thing, or at least readers do, not actually the maesters, the old gods, the Greenseers, all that stuff, their secrets are hidden within, them. Like, that's stuff that maesters aren't going to know. And so you think about that and you're like, well, what are the maesters truly learning? Well, what does that mean that they have a higher knowledge? Again, trying to say that you are a master on magic and the study of it is quite an interesting claim, given the people teaching you it have no real idea of magic in the world. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to say, in my opinion. He confessed to trying spells in his youth like many others, but nothing ever came of it. Lewin said magic doesn't work. This is the way I would look at it. if you're somebody that's a Star Wars fan, you all at one point when you were a kid try to do the Force. It's like trying to do the Force, but there's no Jedi to teach you how to do the Force. So of course you're not going to believe the Force exists. That's how I look at it. Like it's like if you look at like Han Solo in the Star Wars movies, he doesn't believe in the Force, right? But that's because he's never seen anybody do it. So how would he ever do the Force? The same he got the same exact idea here. That's the way I look at this. It's like Lewin has a bias because he couldn't do magic. He believes that there is no magic. That's kind of the way he believes it to be. Lewin said that magic simply did not work. Bran objected, citing his and Rickon's dream and existence of mages and warlocks in the East, which Lewin kind of just basically says they may claim to be mages, but they're more just like tricks and illusions. They're like magic that we would see in today's world, where a lot of it's just deception, tricks, stuff of that nature, which we know that also to be false. We know for a fact that there are like people with magic in Essos, and the Maesters just don't bother to check it. He reflected on how little humans truly understand how everything changes over time. Mountains rise and fall, rivers shift, stars fall, cities vanish, and even gods may die, which this is true, right? We change and evolve as individuals. You go back 1,000 years and the society would be very different, right? Right now we have the internet, we have, media, things like AI are starting to become much more popular. How will that evolve? In the next 100 years, where will we be technologically? Where will we ever establish ourselves on another planet? Like, these are questions that I probably will never find out in my lifetime, but in the next person's lifetime, how different will it be? And so Maester Lewin is correct on that idea, but I don't think that should just say, oh yeah, magic is gone because the times have changed. Unfortunately, Lewin, that is not the case. But that gets to page 332, the last of the chapter. Maester Lewin told Bran that maybe magic used to be powerful, but it's gone now, just smoke left after fire. But this is my thing, right? If you believe that magic was once a thing and it could be powerful, what is to say it's still not being used in the places where we as a society don't go to, north of the wall? That's the argument I would be saying if I was Bran. He even confirms that Valyria was the last place where magic really lived, and now that's gone too. And if this is what I think is key, if that's what he was learning with the Maesters, if that's what Old Town was teaching him, don't you think it's very suspicious that the last remnants of Valyria, being the Targaryens and their dragons, then come to Westeros, and we have some very suspicious actions that happen throughout, so that now somebody like Maester Lewin can claim that that is the truth, right? There isn't any dragons left. There is no magic left that, we can see anyway in Westeros. You just look at that, like the way that they're ingrained to teach about magic. This is more about Old Town than it is Lewin. Just find that very interesting. He even goes even further, right? He even points out dragons, giants, the children of the forest, all vanished or forgotten. We know he's wrong on all three of those. Giants still exist. Dragons have just now started existing with Daenerys, and the children of the forest also exist. Now you can forgive him for thinking those things don't exist because they haven't been seen in a very long amount of time. Dragons, they haven't been seen in, like 150 years type idea, but still. Lewin said that Jojen might believe in his dreams, but the green sight is just a myth now. No one has it. So Bran has now seen the other side. He has seen Lewin's argument, and he himself was not fully convinced, but he wants to believe it. Bran wants to believe that there is no unknown, force that could have all these powers. He wants to believe the world is how it is. It's kind of the argument of like the Harry Potter universe, where the idea is that muggles see what they want to see. That's kind of the idea that I think Bran is right now, where he kind of, in a way, doesn't want magic to be real, but at the same time, he does want it to be real. He's kind of conflicted on what he believes about it. Bran repeats this to Mira at dusk. He apologizes for the wolf attack, blaming both Summer and Jojen's pushing. Bran insisted the crow lied when it said he could fly, and that Jojen was lying too. Mira pushed back gently, saying that maybe it's the Maester who's wrong. And Mira goes a little further, right? She reminded him that even Lord Eddard listened to counsel, but Ned made his own choices. He didn't blindly follow counsel. He had to figure it out for himself, telling Bran that he should think for himself, not take what Lewin says as hard fact and maybe think about it. I think it's really wise advice. I think learning your own beliefs, your own values is great, right? Your parents might have a certain set of ways that they believe the world is or whatnot, but it's for you to take that into account and figure it out yourself. I think that's the way, when people talk about politics, they talk about moral, ethical codes, whatever. It shouldn't be what people are telling you is the right thing. It should be what you think it is, right? Look at both sides or look at whatever you need to look at to figure out your choice on how you think the world should be and how it is. She then told him of one of Jojen's dreams that will be very, very important going forward. She said that Bran was at supper and Maester Luwin served him rare, bloody meat, the king's cut. But instead, the Freg boys got old, gray, dead meat, but they liked it more. Bran didn't understand this, but Mira said he would one day. And this is something that is going to come to fruition within the next Bran chapter. And right now, you don't really understand what this means, but it's going to be interesting when it's confirmed, right? The actual idea of what's happening in the West with Robb and Stevron Frey. So we'll talk about it when we get to that chapter with Bran. But it is a really interesting prophecy because on your first read, that really doesn't make any sense at all. But that night at supper, Bran was nervous. He looked at the food being served, but it was just pigeon pie, same for everybody. Nothing was wrong or weird about the phrase food. I do want to point out something though. It is interesting that we have an emphasis on pigeon pie when we know that there's probably a Frey pie that happens in A Dance with Dragons. It's interesting the way that we have kind of a little bit of a foreshadow to that event to come later. He told himself that Luwin was right, that Jojen was just imagining things. Bran was relieved on one account that magic just seemed not to be real, but he was also disappointed. Because if magic was real, then anything could happen. Ghosts could walk, trees could talk, broken boys could be knights. This is everything in the manipulation of Bran. The reason Bran is going to look out for the three-eyed crow to go north of the wall is because he believes that he can fix his life, that he can be a normal boy, and we know that that's just not the case. But without magic, those dreams are just stories. And Bran, sitting alone in the dark, says aloud the hard truth he's trying to accept. There's no magic, and the stories are just stories, which means he'll never walk, he'll never fly. It's a really dark way to end the chapter because it's Bran, looking at his own life and, wanting more and to be special, to be able to do magic. And he's struggling with that concept between Luwin on one side and Mira and Jojen on the other. But thank you guys all for watching. I really enjoyed this Bran chapter. I think this is one of his better ones of the book. And I hope you guys did as well. And I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.